I should have known the morning would go wrong the second I stepped into the lobby of the tower. Mondays always carried a certain bite, but this one felt sharper. Maybe it was the cold wind that had followed me into the cafe, or maybe it was the fact that I had come downstairs dressed so simply that no one in the building would have recognized me as their CEO. That was the point. Sometimes I walked the building without my title, without the tailored suit or the polished heels, just to see how people treated the ones they assumed were nobody. That morning, I wished I had not done that. The line at the cafe was already stretching past the pastry case. People tapped shoes, checked watches, muttered about schedules. The barista called out orders with clipped impatience. I tucked my hair behind my ear and stepped forward when it was my turn. "One large vanilla latte extra hot," I said quietly. The barista barely looked up. $5.85. I slid my card into the reader without thinking. The screen blinked once, then flashed red. Declined. It must be a mistake, I thought. I tried again, pushing the card in harder, as if that would change anything. Again the chime. Again the red. The barista sighed loudly enough for the line to hear. "Ma'am, if you cannot pay, please step aside." My cheeks burned. I reached into my coat pocket, then the other, then fumbled through my small bag. No wallet, no backup card, no cash. I had left everything in my office upstairs. Someone in line behind me snorted in amusement. Another whispered something that sounded like, "Of course." A woman muttered that people should check their funds before ordering. A man said he had a meeting and I was wasting everyone's time. It was ridiculous. I could have bought every drink in that shop 10 times over, but I could not say that. No one knew who I was, and revealing it now would look like I was trying to embarrass the barista or flex power. So I stood there in the humiliation, frozen. "I am so sorry," I said softly. "I can run up to my office and—" "Come on, lady, move it." Someone barked. My throat tightened. My palms felt cold. I hated that I could not defend myself without exposing something I did not want exposed. Before I could step back, a calm voice behind me said, "She is fine." Everyone turned. A man in a Navy security uniform stepped forward, holding his phone up to the reader. The payment beeped successful before I could even breathe. The barista's entire posture relaxed. "Thank you, sir." The man nodded once, then turned to me, handing me my cup. "You are all right. It happens." That was it. No pity, no annoyance, no attempt to make himself a hero. His tone was almost gentle, like he genuinely believed it was no big deal. I stared at him as he stepped back. He was tall, but not imposing. Dark hair neatly trimmed, tired eyes but steady. His name tag said Evan. I opened my mouth to protest, but nothing came out. "Thank you," I finally managed. He shook his head. "It is okay." He did not offer more. He did not wait for me to repay him or explain myself. He simply nodded once and stepped away. But the worst part was not the humiliation. It was what happened next. As I adjusted my bag, the lid on the cup slipped slightly and a splash of hot coffee dotted across my blouse. "Perfect," I whispered. Evan paused mid-step. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded napkin. He did not invade my space. He waited until I nodded before he reached out and gently dabbed the fabric near my collarbone. His touch was careful, respectful. "There," he said. "Mostly gone." I looked up at him stunned. People were still watching. But for the first time since walking in, I did not feel small. I felt seen. Evan nodded again, turned and walked away through the back exit near the elevators. I watched him go, still clutching my cup. Around me, the line moved again. Orders shouted. Coffee steamed. Life resumed as if nothing had happened. But something had. I stood there longer than I meant to. My chest felt tight in a strange way, not from embarrassment, but from a kind of unfamiliar warmth. People were kind to me when they knew who I was, when they wanted something, when they expected something in return. But he did not even ask my name. He did not look twice at my clothes or my messy hair or the slight panic on my face. He simply helped and left, quietly, cleanly, without attaching himself to the moment. When I finally walked toward the elevators, I found myself repeating the same thought over and over like a small echo. Who is he? And why does kindness look so effortless on him? I told myself I would repay him the next morning. It was simple logic. He had done something kind for me, and I did not like having a debt, even one as small as a $5 coffee. But when I reached the lobby the following day and spotted him adjusting the velvet ropes near the visitor check-in desk, I felt something strange tighten in my chest. He looked different in daylight, even though it was the same uniform, the same quiet posture, the same calm expression. Maybe it was the way he moved, efficient, unobtrusive, noticing everything without calling attention to himself. I approached with my coffee in hand and rehearsed the simple line in my head. "Thank you again. Here is the money I owe you." It should have been easy, but when he turned toward me, the words tangled. "Morning," I said, instead too brightly. He nodded with a small, polite smile. "Morning." I held out a crisp tin. "I wanted to give this back to you. You did not have to cover for me yesterday." He raised an eyebrow, expression unreadable. "I do not need that," I insisted. "Really, please." It was just coffee. He gently closed my fingers around the bill and pushed my hand back. "Happens to everyone." But it did not feel like it happened to everyone. It felt like it had happened to me in the most humiliating way, and he had stepped in without hesitation. "You do not even know me," I said quietly. He shrugged slightly. "Do I need to?" I opened my mouth, closed it again. The answer was no, not really, but no one ever said it that way. People always wanted something: conversation, validation, recognition, something. But Evan just returned to adjusting the ropes as if the matter were settled. And maybe for him it was. For me, it was not. I watched him throughout the morning, telling myself it was accidental every time my eyes drifted in his direction. But everywhere I looked, he was doing something small, easy to miss if you were not paying attention. An elderly tenant struggled with the revolving door. Evan stepped forward, slowed it with one hand, and spoke a few calm words that made the man laugh. A woman in heels dropped her access card while juggling a laptop bag. Evan picked it up before she even bent down, handed it to her with a nod, then returned to his post without waiting for a thank you. A young intern ran toward the elevator, waving frantically. Evan reached it first, held the doors until the boy darted inside, breathless and grateful. None of these moments were dramatic. They were quiet flashes of decency. But I felt something unsettling every time I witnessed one. A strange mix of admiration and unease, like watching someone reveal a truth I had forgotten existed. People passed him without noticing, without pausing. In a corporate tower filled with ambition, noise, and self-importance, he blended like a shadow. But I saw him, and I could not unsee him. Around noon, I walked back through the lobby and overheard two employees near the cafe whispering. "That guy is weird," one said. "Always helping like he wants something." The other snorted. "Or he just does not have real work to do. He needs to relax. People like that make others uncomfortable." I felt irritation rise in me, sharp and immediate. They had no idea what they were talking about. They saw kindness as weakness because they did not understand the cost of offering it. But I stayed silent, reminding myself my identity was still hidden. I stepped out into the courtyard for fresh air, but the words stayed with me. People like that make others uncomfortable. Why did they see him that way? Why did it bother me so much that they did? I returned inside an hour later and found Evan kneeling near the entrance, tying a little girl's shoelace while her flustered father tried to gather their belongings. Evan finished, tapped the girl's shoulder lightly, and she beamed as if he had given her a gift. The father thanked him quickly and hurried on. Evan watched them go with a soft, almost wistful expression. It made something inside me twist. By afternoon, I realized something important. This was not normal, not the kindness itself, but the way he carried it, with no performance, no agenda, no noise, just steadiness, a quiet willingness to see people exactly as they were. And no one treated him the way he treated them. When most people looked at him, they saw a uniform. When he looked at them, he saw a person. And I wondered what he saw when he looked at me. That thought unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. Later that day, I passed him near the elevator and forced myself to speak. "I never thanked you properly," I said. He paused mid-step, looking at me with those steady, unreadable eyes. "You already did." "Not really." He studied me a moment. A softness flickered in his expression, brief but real. Then he said quietly, "Some things do not need more words." Before I could answer, someone called his name from across the lobby and he excused himself. I stood there watching him walk away, feeling the same strange weight settle in my chest again. This was not just kindness. This was something else. Something I could not name yet. Something that did not feel normal. Something that felt like the beginning of a shift I was not prepared for. The weather turned without warning that week. One moment, the sky was a soft muted gray, and the next, it cracked open as if someone had wrung out a soaked towel above the city. Rain fell in tight, cold sheets that slapped against the glass, and thunder rolled so close it felt like the building hummed. I had forgotten my umbrella that morning, which was ironic because I owned 3 of them, each tucked in different offices and cars, like a person with too many lives and too little time to manage them. I stood near the lobby windows, waiting for the downpour to ease, telling myself I would step out once it softened. But I was really watching Evan. He was outside under the narrow awning holding a black umbrella over a young employee who must have been no older than 22. She stood frozen on the steps, clearly terrified of the storm. Lightning cracked somewhere nearby, and she jumped, gripping the railing. Evan spoke to her softly, words I could not hear through the glass, but whatever he said made her shoulders relax a little. He waited until she steadied herself, then walked her the entire way to the shuttle stop, even though it meant getting soaked himself. By the time he returned to the entrance, his hair and shoulders were drenched. He shook off the water like someone used to being caught between storms, not bothered, just resigned. When he stepped inside, I handed him the towel from the front desk before the receptionist even noticed. "Here," I said without thinking. "You will get sick like that." He accepted it with a small nod. "Thank you." I wanted to say more to comment on what I had seen outside, but the words balled up in my throat. Finally, I managed, "You did not have to walk her all the way. She was scared," he said simply. "And scared people do not think straight." Rain hammered the roof above us, a metallic drumming that somehow made our quiet conversation feel even smaller, more intimate. Evan finished drying his hair, then folded the towel neatly. He always did things like that, precise, respectful, like he was trying to leave the world exactly as he found it, or slightly better. "Why do you do all this?" I asked before I could stop myself. His head lifted slightly, but he did not turn. All what? The small things. The big things. The helping people who do not notice. The kindness no one asks for. The patience none of us deserve. He stilled. The smile that sometimes touched the edge of his mouth did not come. Instead, something quieter passed through him. Something heavier. For a long moment he said nothing. I wondered if I had crossed a line. Then he spoke. "Because I know what it feels like when no one helps." The words were soft, almost a whisper, but they hit me like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples of meaning. I did not understand yet spread outward in my chest. I looked at him, really looked at him, but he kept his gaze on the lobby floor as if afraid the truth might be too visible in his eyes. I wanted to ask more, but something in his posture stopped me. His shoulders pulled inward, not in weakness, but in protection. A quiet barrier. Whatever history lived inside that one sentence, he was not ready to unpack it for anyone, least of all, a woman he believed was just another tenant in the building. So instead, I asked gently, "Does anyone help you now?" He glanced at me, and for the first time since I had met him, I saw something vulnerable flicker behind his calm expression. Something lonely. Something that made me want to reach out. "Not really," he said, "but that is all right. I have learned to manage." Rain streaked down the glass in long, vertical lines behind us. Outside, people rushed with umbrellas and jackets over their heads trying to outrun the storm. Inside, it felt strangely still. I felt an ache growing in me, an ache I did not want to acknowledge. When someone speaks from a place of real hurt, you feel it, even if you do not know the full story. And I felt his. Deeply, more than I should have. "Are you always like this?" I asked. "Like what?" "Quiet, steady, the one who stands in the rain for everyone else." He shrugged softly. "Life is easier when you do not expect much." That answer hurt me in ways I did not expect. It sounded like someone who had been disappointed too many times to risk hoping again. Before I could speak, a tenant hurried toward us waving a phone. "Sir, can you help me find the loading dock?" she asked Evan, barely glancing at me. Evan nodded, already stepping toward her. "Of course." He turned back just once, meeting my gaze briefly, as if aware he had said more than he meant to. Then he walked away. I stood there long after he disappeared down the hallway, staring at the place he had been standing. One sentence. One small slip. And yet it shifted everything. It made his kindness suddenly look less like habit and more like armor. It made me wonder how a man could carry that much softness after suffering whatever had carved that silence inside him. And most of all, it made me realize I cared more than I should, more than was safe. The rain kept falling outside, but inside me something else had begun to open. The incident happened so fast, I did not even have time to brace myself. One moment, I was stepping out of the elevator, clutching a fresh cup of coffee, finally taking a small break after a morning that felt like a series of small fires. The next moment, a sharply dressed man in an expensive gray suit turned the corner too quickly and collided with me. The impact jolted my wrist, and the hot coffee splashed across his sleeve and the front of his pristine shirt. A few drops hit my hand and stung, but I barely registered the pain because the man had already rounded on me with the fury of someone who believed the world existed solely for his convenience. "Are you blind?" he snapped, looking at the dark stain spreading across his shirt like it was a personal attack. I opened my mouth to apologize, but he did not give me the chance. "Unbelievable! People like you should pay attention. Some of us have places to be." The hallway buzzed with employees passing by, but no one stopped. No one looked at me long enough to see the humiliation burning up my neck. I tried again. "I am sorry I did not see you coming around the corner." He rolled his eyes dramatically. "Of course you did not. Why would you? You probably have nothing important going on." His voice was loud enough that people slowed their steps, pretending not to listen while listening. Heat crawled up my face. Not just from the embarrassment, but from the sting of being spoken to like someone disposable. He kept going, as if he had been waiting for an excuse to unload his bad morning onto the nearest target. "Look at this shirt. Do you know how much this costs?" I bit my tongue because I could have answered. I could have told him I owned 3 of that same brand. I could have told him I could buy stock in the company that made it. I could have told him I was the CEO of the building he was yelling in, but none of that mattered because saying it would have felt cheap, like proving worth to someone who had already decided I had none. So I just said softly, "Let me pay for the cleaning." He scoffed. "You pay for this. Please." The tone in that single word sliced deeper than any insult. I felt it physically, like being pushed backward, though he never touched me. I felt small in a way I had not felt in years. And then I heard a calm voice behind me. "That is enough." The tone was steady, grounded, not loud, but strong enough to cut through the tension like a clean blade through rope. I turned. Evan was there. I had not seen him approach. He must have been down the hall because he still held a stack of visitor badges in one hand, as if he had been in the middle of organizing something. His posture was relaxed, shoulders loose, but his eyes were firm, focused directly on the man in the suit. "She apologized," Evan said again. "That is enough." The man blinked, incredulous. "And who are you exactly?" Evan stepped forward, just slightly. Not threatening, not confrontational, just present. Someone who heard her apologize more than once, and someone who is telling you that is where this ends. The man scoffed and looked around as if expecting support, but the hallway had gone still. People pretended to work but were really listening. No one defended him. No one joined him. It was just Evan and me. And for the first time since the coffee had spilled, I felt the ground steady beneath me. "She ruined my shirt," the man said, clutching the fabric dramatically. Evan's expression did not change. "Then take it to dry cleaning like everyone else." His tone was so reasonable, so utterly unimpressed that the man sputtered. I watched his indignation collapse in real time. He muttered something under his breath, glared at me one last time, and stormed off toward the elevators. The moment he disappeared, the hallway resumed its rhythm as if nothing had happened. Conversations restarted. Footsteps continued. But I stayed, frozen breath caught somewhere high in my chest. Evan turned to me. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. I nodded, though I was not sure it was true. My hands still trembled slightly. I had grown used to boardrooms negotiations, hostile investors and men twice his size trying to intimidate me professionally. But something about that hallway moment felt different. I had not been Claire, the CEO. I had been Claire, the woman holding a cup of coffee, and someone had spoken to me like I was beneath him. Evan saw it. Worse, he felt it. "I am sorry," he said suddenly. I blinked. "For what?" "For stepping in. Some people do not like that." I shook my head immediately. "No, I am glad you did." His gaze softened. He looked at my hand still burning from the spill. "You should put something cold on that." "You burned yourself." I had not even thought about the sting until he said it. I stared at the red mark blooming across my skin and felt a wave of emotion I could not name. It was not about the burn. It was about being seen. Really seen. "Come on," Evan said gently. "Let us go to the front desk. They have a first aid kit." He walked ahead of me, not touching me, not guiding me, but creating space in front of us like a shelter. I followed, my steps slow, my breath uneven. At the desk, he rummaged for a cold pack, wrapped it in a paper towel, and handed it to me with careful hands. "Hold it there," he said. "It will help." I pressed it to my skin and exhaled shakily. "Thank you, Evan. You did not have to do that." He looked at me with quiet sincerity. "Yes, I did." His words lodged in my chest like a warm stone. I realized then with startling clarity that this man had stepped between me and cruelty, without knowing my name, my title, or my worth. He had done it because it was right, because someone had once not done it for him. And that frightened me more than anything. It frightened me because I knew I was beginning to care more than I should, more than was safe, more than made sense. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt my defenses shift. Not fall, not break, but shift. Enough to let him in. I did not intend to learn anything about Evan that day. In fact, I had promised myself I would keep a healthy distance between us after the hallway incident. He had stepped in, protected me, steadied me in a moment when I felt groundless, and it shook something loose inside me. I told myself the smartest thing I could do was to leave it there. But the universe or fate or something far less poetic called corporate routine had other plans. It started with a meeting, the kind I usually dreaded, a mid-level managerial sync about security operations, staffing reports, and infrastructure oversight. Boring on the surface, but necessary. I walked into the conference room expecting to hear the same recycled topics. Instead, I heard Evan's name. One of the operations managers, a woman named Denise, who prided herself on knowing everyone's business, leaned forward conspiratorially and said, "I still cannot believe we have someone like Evan working as a building guard. He is too smart for that." Another manager shrugged. "Smart maybe, but something is definitely off there." I stilled. "Off?" Denise nodded eagerly. "Oh, yes. My cousin works in HR processing the facility contracts. She said Evan's background check showed he used to be some kind of high-ranking engineer or something. Pretty big deal in tech. Then suddenly he dropped out of the industry for 3 years. No explanation. No job history. Just vanished." The second manager frowned. "That sounds weird. Are they sure it's not something bad?" Denise lowered her voice even more. "They said all his screenings were clean. No criminal record, no misconduct, nothing. But when someone disappears for that long, it usually means one thing." Something happened. My pulse quickened. I kept my expression neutral, the same corporate mask I had mastered years ago. But internally, my thoughts were spiraling. 3 years. I repeated it in my mind like a clue dropped in a mystery I had not realized I was solving. What kind of man quietly left behind a promising tech career to become a building security guard? I forced myself into. The meeting contributed where needed, but my mind kept drifting. When it ended, I returned to my office with a simmering curiosity that felt more like concern than professional interest. I opened my laptop, hesitated a long moment, then pulled up the internal directory. All employees, regardless of department, had a simple digital file: basic HR information, emergency contacts, job history. When I typed in Evan's name, his file loaded instantly. It was sparse, intentionally sparse. Job title: security officer. Contract type: internal operations. Prior employment: Hallwell Technologies, senior systems engineer. Dates: 8 years. Then under the line that listed his departure: reason for leaving: personal leave. No elaboration, no footnotes, no references. Just 2 words holding a void. I should have stopped there. I knew it. A part of me argued that whatever he had lived through was not my business. But another part whispered that it mattered. Not because he owed me answers, but because the silence around him was too loud. I opened a secure browser window and searched his name. It felt wrong, intrusive, but the urge to understand him was stronger than the guilt. At first, there were typical search results: old tech panels with his name in the roster, a few archived engineering patents he had contributed to. Then I found the article. It was simple, small, almost forgotten by the internet, but the headline hit me like a fist. Local engineer loses wife and child in tragic freeway collision. I clicked it before I could think. There was a photo. Evan, 4 years younger, standing beside a makeshift memorial on a highway shoulder. Flowers, stuffed animals, a framed photo of a smiling woman holding a toddler. His face in the picture was hollowed, shocked, broken. A man trying to stand upright while everything inside him collapsed. I felt a sting behind my eyes and swallowed hard. The article was brief. A drunk driver had swerved into his family's car. His wife died at the scene. His 3-year-old son passed away hours later. Evan had been in another vehicle behind them. He saw the aftermath before anyone could stop him. After the crash, he took an extended leave from his company. A few months later, he resigned entirely. The article ended there. No follow-up, no interviews, just an abrupt end to a life that had once been whole. I leaned back in my chair and pressed a hand to my forehead. So that was the weight behind his eyes. The stillness in him, the gentleness that felt earned through fire, the quiet grief that made sense of every word he had ever spoken. I know what it feels like when no one helps. His calmness, his patience, his kindness, his aversion to attention, his careful way of taking up the smallest amount of space possible. All of it was survival. I closed the tabs quietly, almost reverently, as if shutting a door to someone's private chapel. For several minutes, I just sat there staring at the city skyline, unable to shake the image of him standing at that memorial. I had always assumed his calm came from strength, but now I understood it came from loss. There was a knock on my door. My heart lurched as if he could somehow sense that I had just sifted through the ruins of his past. "Come in," I said, forcing my voice steady. The door opened, and Evan stepped inside, holding a clipboard. He looked tired, the kind of tired that never fully left, but his eyes were warm when they met mine. "I noticed you looked shaken after the meeting," he said. "Just checking if you are all right." A lump rose in my throat. I nodded, unable to speak, because the urge to tell him I knew everything surged up too fast, too raw. But I stayed silent. It was not my place. "Not yet." "Thank you for asking," I managed to say. His expression softened. "Any time." Then he turned to leave, and I almost called after him. Almost told him I was sorry for things I had no right to apologize for. But I let him walk away because I knew this truth I had uncovered was a fragile one. And until he chose to share it with me himself, I would carry it quietly. In the solitude of my office, I let out a slow breath. Now I knew who he really was, and somehow that made everything more complicated and more inevitable. The next morning, I walked into the building with a decision already formed, a quiet resolve sitting in my chest, like a weight that felt strangely right. I had spent half the night thinking about Evan. Not just the tragedy I had discovered, but the strength he showed in how he moved through the world now. The way he helped people without hesitation. The way he never demanded anything in return. The way he carried grief like something he refused to let harden him. I knew what I wanted to do. Or at least I thought I did. The opportunity had already been brewing in the company for weeks. Our tech division was expanding, adding a new internal project team focused on system security and infrastructure modernization. A team that needed someone with precisely Evan's skill set. And unlike other departments, I had direct influence over this one. It felt like alignment or fate, or maybe just the universe nudging me forward. But when I saw him that morning, standing near the security desk, checking a delivery schedule, all my carefully rehearsed words evaporated. He looked up when I approached. His eyes softened just slightly, the smallest sign that he recognized me not just as another tenant, but as someone who had seen him at his most vulnerable moments. "Good morning, Claire," he said. His voice was calm, steady, carrying that warmth that made you want to step closer just to stay in its orbit. "Hi," I replied. I cleared my throat, fighting the nerves that made me feel absurd because I was the CEO of this entire building, and yet somehow this man made me feel exposed. "Do you have a minute?" He nodded without hesitation, but his posture straightened just a little like he sensed something unusual. "Sure, what's going on?" I gestured toward the small employee lounge tucked behind the main lobby. It was empty at this hour, quiet enough that it felt like a safer place to say what I needed to say. When we stepped inside, I folded my hands in front of me, grounding myself. "Evan," I said slowly, "I wanted to talk to you about something important." His brows pulled together slightly. "About what?" I took a steady breath. "I know you used to work in tech. High level. Senior engineering." He froze. Not outwardly, not dramatically, but in the subtle way his shoulders stopped moving, the way his eyes went still. "Who told you that?" he asked, voice quieter. "Some things came up in a meeting," I said truthfully. "Nothing detailed, just enough to make me want to ask you directly." He looked down at the tiled floor, jaw tense as if bracing for judgment he'd known too many times before. I continued gently. "There is a new project forming in the tech division. It needs someone with your experience. Someone who understands systems the way you clearly do. Someone who can lead under pressure." I paused. "Someone like you." His reaction was nothing like what I expected. No curiosity, no spark of interest, no sense of possibility. Instead, he stepped back, shaking his head once a small, decisive motion. "No. No," I repeated, surprised. "Claire," he said, his voice steady but firm, "I am a security guard now. That is my place. That is where people expect me to be." "You are more than that," I argued before I could stop myself. His eyes lifted to mine then, and there was something in them that made my chest tighten. A tired resignation mixed with something sharper, almost a warning. "People think broken means unreliable," he said. "They look at that gap in my resume and see a liability. Not potential, not strength, just damage." "You know that is not true," I said softly. He let out a breath that sounded like he had been holding it for years. "I do not want charity. This is not charity." "Yes, it is," he said quietly. "Even if you do not mean it that way. You see a man who has been through something and you want to fix it." He looked away. "I do not need to be fixed." I took a small step forward before I realized I was doing it. "I am not offering this because I feel sorry for you. I am offering it because you are brilliant, because you deserve more than this front desk and you know it." His jaw tightened. "Not yet," he said, voice low. "I am not ready." The words were so honest, so vulnerable that they silenced everything in me. Not ready, not unwilling, not ungrateful. Just still healing in ways I could not rush for him. "You do not have to decide today," I said finally. "Or tomorrow. Or at all. I just wanted you to know the door is open." His gaze softened, then a slow thawing of something guarded. "Thank you," he murmured. "I mean that. But Claire," I nodded before he finished. "I know, and I won't push." A silence settled between us, not heavy but tender, almost fragile. He ran a hand through his hair, still damp from the morning drizzle. "You are different from the others," he said quietly. "You see people, not roles, not labels." The words hit me harder than I expected. Maybe because I was used to people insulating themselves around me once they learned my title. Maybe because I had spent so long being defined by my job that I forgot what it felt like to be seen beyond it. I wanted to say something meaningful in return, something that carried the weight of what I felt growing between us. But instead, he cleared his throat, breaking the moment gently. "I should get back," he said. "They need me at the desk." "Of course." As he walked away, he paused at the doorway. "Claire." "Yes. Thank you for thinking I deserve more." The door closed behind him before I could answer. I stood alone in the empty lounge, the hum of the vending machine filling the silence. The offer had been refused, but not out of pride, out of pain. I suddenly understood something important. Healing was not a line people crossed, it was a road they walked. And even though Evan had refused the offer, I realized he had taken a step toward trusting me. A small one, but real. The day everything shifted did not announce itself. It did not storm in with drama or warning. It arrived quietly disguised as an ordinary Thursday morning. I walked into Donovan Tower with a coffee in one hand and my badge clipped inside my coat the same way I always did when I wanted to pass through the lobby unnoticed. I liked those rare mornings when no one expected me to lead, decide, solve, approve. For a few stolen minutes, I could watch my own company as if I were just another person moving through its veins. I spotted Evan near the entrance guiding a delivery driver who spoke little English toward the freight elevator. His voice was calm, patient, warm in a way that made strangers relax on instinct. He did that a lot, made people feel safe without ever announcing it. I was about to approach him when my phone buzzed sharply. A message from the CTO. "System malfunction on the 18th floor. Conference room consoles down. Need you immediately." I sighed, pinched the bridge of my nose, then glanced at Evan again. He was finishing with the delivery driver tapping something on the service tablet. I could not explain why, but a thought struck me. He would know what to do. He understood systems. He understood the building better than most of the staff hired to run it. And after what I had learned about him, it felt almost wrong to pretend he was just a guard watching doors and checking badges. I walked toward him. "Evan." He straightened immediately, a faint crease forming between his brows. "Something wrong?" "The 18th floor tech consoles are down. The team says it might be a network failure." He nodded slowly. "Want me to take a look?" "If you have time," I said, hoping the request sounded casual. He followed me to the elevators, stepping inside with a quiet confidence he rarely showed. When the doors closed, the soft hum of machinery filled the silence between us. I glanced at him. "You do not have to if it makes you uncomfortable." He offered the smallest smile. Fixing things is the one part of my old life I still trust myself with. When we reached the 18th floor, the situation was worse than expected. Half the screens were offline. The conference network hub was flickering like a dying heartbeat. Two junior engineers stood nearby, panicked and arguing quietly. Evan walked past them, crouched by the console, and examined the wiring with a focus I had only seen glimpses of before. His posture changed. The uncertainty he sometimes carried fell away. In its place was something sharper, steady, brilliant. He ran his fingers along a bundle of cables, then paused. "Here," he murmured. "Someone forced this connector in backward. It shorted part of the panel." The engineers rushed forward, flustered. "We checked that already, one insisted." Evan shook his head slightly. "You checked the power line, not the data feed. Two different things." He adjusted the cable, rerouted a circuit, pressed a reset combination on the side panel that no ordinary guard should have known. Within seconds, the screens blinked awake. Full system restored. The two engineers stared at him as if they had just watched someone perform quiet magic. Evan stood, wiped his hands against his pants instinctively, and took a small step back. "Done," he said simply, as if he had not just saved an entire floor from shutting down. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it in a way that carried far more than gratitude for his help. We stepped back into the hallway just as a familiar voice called from behind. "Claire." I froze. Evan turned slightly but did not understand immediately. The chairman of the board, Harold Pierce, strode toward us, flanked by two directors. He was mid-conversation, but when he reached me, he stopped. "Claire, we have the investors waiting upstairs. They want the CEO's final notes before the presentation is sent over." He said CEO clearly loudly the way people do when they are used to speaking titles instead of names. And at that moment, Evan went still, completely still. He turned toward me slowly as if trying to make sense of what he had heard. CEO. The word hung between us like a fault line cracking open. Harold continued speaking, oblivious. The prototype proposal needs your signature before noon, and legal needs your approval on the employee policy wording. He finally noticed Evan. Oh, I did not realize you were with the security team. Thank you for escorting her. She often forgets how valuable her time is. Evan blinked once, twice, then looked at me. Really looked at me. His expression shifted. Not anger, not confusion. Something deeper. Something that broke my breath in half. You are the CEO, he asked quietly, voice almost stripped of sound. I opened my mouth. Evan, I was going to tell you. Eventually. He shook his head once, a slow, deliberate motion. No, you were not. You had every chance. The chairman cleared his throat. Claire, we really must hurry. But I could not move, could not look away from Evan. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, they were not empty. They were hurt. I took a step toward him. Evan, please listen. He stepped back, just enough to cut the air between us. I thought you were someone real, he said. Someone who was not hiding. His voice stayed low, controlled, but it carried the weight of something that made my ribs ache. I thought you were someone I could trust. I felt myself flinch. Not visibly, I hoped, but internally everything inside me recoiled at the truth laced in his tone. I tried again. I never lied to you. I just did not tell you everything. He gave a hollow half laugh. That is not better, Claire. His words were quiet, but they landed like a bruise. Especially not from someone who knows how much hidden things cost. He turned away before I could speak again, walked down the hallway without looking back. The chairman touched my arm. Claire, we are late. I nodded numbly, but inside I felt everything shifting. My secret had collided with his world, and now something between us had cracked open something I did not know how to repair. I did not remember much of the investor meeting that followed. My body sat at the head of the long polished table. My voice answered questions, my pen signed documents, but none of me was present. My mind kept replaying the hallway. The moment Harold said CEO, the moment Evan's face changed, the moment he stepped back from me as if my truth were a betrayal. By the time the meeting ended, I walked out of the boardroom with a practiced smile plastered on my face. But the second I reached my office and closed the door, the mask fell. I leaned against the inside of the door, breath, uneven, a familiar ache spreading in my chest. I had been called many things in my life. Ambitious, strategic, cold, intimidating, powerful, but nothing hurt the way Evan's words had hurt. I thought you were someone real. I pressed my hands to my eyes, trying to push the scene away, but it kept returning like a bruise touched too many times. At noon, my assistant buzzed. Evan Morgan just submitted a resignation form. My stomach dropped so fast it made me dizzy. Effective immediately, she added. Do you want me to deny it? I swallowed hard. No. He has the right to leave. She hesitated. Are you sure very few people resign mid-contract? It will raise questions. I forced steadiness into my voice. Let it go through. When the line clicked off, I sat at my desk, staring blankly at the city skyline. The ache inside me grew heavier, spreading like ink in water. I should have expected this. I understood grief well enough to know that for people like Evan, betrayal did not feel small, even when it was unintentional, especially then. I tried to work. I stared at spreadsheets, responded to emails, made 2 calls, but none of it landed. My mind kept drifting to the front lobby where he had spent months greeting visitors with a nod and a warm calm that grounded everyone who passed him. I needed air. I left the office without telling anyone and went downstairs. The lobby was busy with lunchtime foot traffic, but the front desk looked wrong. Empty, too clean, too quiet. A different guard stood there flipping through the logbook. I stepped closer. Is Evan around? I asked, trying to sound neutral. The guard shook his head. No, ma'am. He dropped off his badge an hour ago. Should I tell him you came by? I paused. No. Thank you. I walked out of the building telling myself it was just to clear my head, but my feet moved with their own will. They took me to the small cafe across the street where I had first seen him laugh with a barista about some forgotten detail. He was not there. They took me to the narrow alley behind the building where he usually helped lost delivery drivers reroute packages. He was not there. They took me 3 blocks north to the small park where he sometimes sat alone on his break with a book in hand, head tilted slightly toward the sun, as if trying to remember what warmth felt like. He was not there either. I stood on the sidewalk, cold wind tugging at my coat, and realized how absurd it was. I was searching for a man who clearly did not want to be found. Evening arrived slowly. The city dimmed. I returned to the tower because I had nowhere else to go, at least nowhere that felt right. My office felt colder than usual, too polished, too empty. I sat in the dark for a long time, staring at the faint reflection of myself in the window. At some point, I whispered into the quiet room, "I should have told you sooner." But the city did not answer, and neither did he. The next morning came heavy gray unforgiving. My assistant handed me a stack of urgent documents, but her voice was hushed when she said, "People are asking why one of the guards left so suddenly. Human Resources wants your guidance on how to respond." I exhaled slowly. "Tell them nothing. He has a right to privacy, a right to walk away." I added that last part quietly, almost as if saying it aloud made it less painful. Despite the ache inside my chest, I threw myself into work, trying to drown thought in movement. But even in the busiest moments, I felt an absence next to me, like a space that used to be filled by calm steadiness, by someone who listened gently, by someone who saw me even when he did not know my title. 3 days passed. 3 days in which I did not see him, did not hear from him, did not know if he hated me, if he simply needed distance, or if I had lost the chance to explain myself forever. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, I found myself drifting downstairs again. Not consciously, more like something inside me was tugging me there. Maybe it was hope, maybe it was longing, or maybe it was the simple fact that some people leave marks on your world that cannot be ignored no matter how hard you try. I walked through the lobby slowly, eyes scanning the familiar corners. There was no sign of him, but something else caught my attention. The bench just outside the revolving doors. The one where he sometimes sat on his breaks. Someone had left a folded piece of paper on it. My heart thudded as I stepped outside and lifted it. It was a note written in his handwriting. I recognized the firm, steady strokes instantly. "Claire," it said, "I need time. Please do not come looking for me." I reread the line 3 times, each time feeling a different ache inside my chest. He had anticipated me. Known I would search. Known me better than people who had worked beside me for a decade. Known me in ways that frightened me with their truth. I closed my eyes, holding the note tightly in my hand. Evan had walked away from me, not with anger, not with cruelty, but with a quiet finality that cut deeper than either. I wanted to run after him anyway. I wanted to ignore the note, but I didn't, because the man I cared for had asked for space. And love, the kind that mattered, the kind that healed instead of harmed, always respected the boundaries carved from someone's pain. I stood there on the cold steps of the building, holding his handwriting against my heart, feeling the sting of something I had not felt in years. Loss. Not of a relationship. Not yet. But of possibility. Of someone who made the world feel gentler. Someone I was afraid I might not get back. The wind rustled around me as the day grew quiet. Evan was gone. And for the first time since becoming CEO, I had no idea how to fix something that mattered this much. The day my world tipped did not begin with disaster. It began with routine. A quiet morning coffee, a stack of documents waiting on my desk, a brisk meeting with the legal team about policy updates. Nothing unusual. Nothing that warned me that by noon the company I had spent 10 years building would turn on me with a speed so sharp it left my breath tangled in my throat. It started when my assistant rushed into my office, pale and trembling, a printed report in her hand. "Claire, you need to see this right now." I took the paper and scanned the opening lines. And then everything inside me went cold. A leaked internal email. My name plastered across it. A message taken out of context, twisted deliberately to look like I was cutting employee benefits without care, like I was prioritizing investors over the very people who kept the company running. The email was not real. The wording was wrong. It was a fabrication. But to anyone who did not know the truth, it looked damning. My assistant whispered, "The staff is panicking. Someone already forwarded it to the media." I felt my pulse rise. Who sent it? We don't know yet, but it came from inside. Of course it did. Betrayal almost always comes from within. I stood up, grabbed my blazer, and walked toward the elevator with a speed that came from instinct, not thought. When I reached the boardroom, voices were already raised. 5 members of the board, 2 division heads, and several managers who rarely entered this room unless there was blood in the water. They turned to face me the moment I stepped inside. "Claire, how could you approve something like this? This is unacceptable. The press is already calling. Employees are threatening walkouts. Do you have any explanation at all?" One director slapped the printed email on the table as if throwing down evidence in a courtroom. "You need to answer for this." My jaw tightened. I did not write this. The wording is not mine. It is an edited fabrication. They stared at me like I had spoken nonsense. "Convenient timing for you to say that," one of them muttered. "The internal tensions are already high. Why would someone fabricate an email like this?" I clenched my hands at my sides. "Because someone wants me gone. Someone wants the board to turn against me. Someone wants the company to crumble." But before I could say another word, the CFO leaned forward, his voice dripping with false concern. "Claire, you need to step back from this project until we finish the investigation." Step back. Those 2 words struck me harder than I expected. I had given this company everything: my time, my energy, my loyalty, my heart. And yet, the moment trouble bloomed, the knives came swiftly and without hesitation. My throat burned as I spoke. "You are assuming guilt before evidence." The CFO shrugged. "Sometimes smoke means fire, and what if it doesn't?" I asked quietly. "What if someone put the smoke machine here on purpose?" No one responded. Their silence said everything. In their eyes, I was already halfway guilty. I forced myself to stay steady, even as the ache in my chest deepened. I looked around the table at people who had praised me for years, people who had benefited from my decisions, people who had smiled in my direction but never truly stood beside me. Now they were searching for the quickest way to distance themselves. I opened my mouth to defend myself again, but the door behind me swung open, and every head in the room turned sharply. Evan walked in, and the moment I saw him, my breath caught. He looked different than he had 3 days ago. No guard uniform, just dark jeans, a fitted jacket, and a determination I had never seen so clearly in him. His eyes scanned the room, cold and calculating, before landing on me. Then he stepped forward. Rachel, the head of HR, snapped, "This is a closed board meeting." Evan didn't look at her. He kept walking. The CFO scoffed. "What is a former security guard doing barging in here?" Evan finally stopped at the end of the long table, hands resting on the polished surface. His voice was calm, controlled, but every syllable carried weight. "Because the person you are trying to blame has been cleaning up your failures for months." Silence. Heavy. Echoing. He continued, "That email you are all pointing fingers about. It was sent from a workstation on the 14th floor. A workstation that was flagged weeks ago for suspicious network activity. You did nothing about it." The room stiffened. "And this so-called policy change," he went on. I traced the metadata. "It does not match any of Claire's communications patterns. Not her device ID, not her encryption signature, not her writing structure." He looked directly at the CFO. Whoever sent this knew how to make it look real, but not real enough for someone who actually knows how to read embedded data. The CFO sputtered. "Are you implying I am not implying anything," Evan said calmly. "I am stating the facts. Claire did not write this. And if any of you had bothered to look at the code instead of panicking, you would have known it too." Another silence. This one even heavier, even sharper. I stared at him stunned. He had walked away from me. He had asked me not to come looking for him, yet here he was standing in front of a room full of people who questioned me, defending me with more conviction than any board member ever had. Harold finally spoke, incredulous. "Evan, how exactly do you know all this?" Evan turned his eyes to him, unblinking. "Because before this, I spent 8 years building and dismantling systems just like yours. And unlike some people here, I do not run when things get messy." My chest tightened, hard. Something hot stung behind my eyes, and I blinked fast, unwilling to break in front of the board. Evan continued, his voice steady. "So, if you are done accusing the wrong person, I suggest you start investigating what actually matters." A beat, then another. No one spoke. No one dared. Finally, Harold cleared his throat. "Claire, you are reinstated on the project. We will begin a formal investigation into the breach immediately." I nodded stiffly, unable to trust my voice. The meeting dissolved quickly after that. People left in a daze of embarrassment and confusion. But I remained still. Evan remained still too. When the last person left the room was quiet. Very quiet. I turned to him slowly, and for the first time in days, he looked directly at me without anger or hurt in his eyes. Just something raw, something familiar, something like concern, or something like coming back. My voice shook when I finally spoke. "You came back." Evan exhaled, running a hand across the back of his neck. "You fell." His eyes softened. "And I could not let you fall alone." The breath I had been holding finally escaped. My world had shattered in that conference room, but when I looked at him, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. When I fell, he stood back up. For me. The night the truth came for us did not arrive with noise. It arrived with stillness. The kind of stillness that feels like the breath the world takes before something irreversible happens. After the board meeting, after everyone left in scattered shame, Evan and I walked out of the conference room without speaking. We moved side by side, but not touching, not yet bridging the space that had expanded between us over the past few days. The hallway outside was dim, most offices already closed for the evening. My heels echoed. His steps were silent. At the elevators, I finally forced my voice to work. "Thank you." He exhaled through his nose, something between a sigh and a release. "You don't have to thank me." I turned slightly toward him. "I do. You didn't have to come. You didn't have to defend me. You didn't have to walk into that room." His jaw tightened, and he looked away, eyes fixed on nothing. Maybe I did. The elevator doors slid open. We stepped inside. The ride down was quiet until he spoke in a voice low enough that I almost missed it. "I couldn't watch them tear you apart." Something clenched in my chest, tight and unsteady. I wanted to ask him 100 things to unravel every emotion he had locked behind that steady gaze. But the doors opened on the lobby and a sudden wave of noise rushed toward us. Cameras, reporters, microphones, lights. They had been waiting. For me. For the scandal. For the CEO who had supposedly betrayed her own workforce. And now, they saw Evan beside me. The questions came like arrows. "Claire, is it true you approved the policy cuts? Did you falsify budget allocations? Did you try to cover it up? Who is the man with you? Is he involved? Did he leak the email?" Evan stepped in front of me instantly. A shield, a barrier, a wall I had never asked for but desperately needed. His voice was steady, cutting through the chaos. "Back up!" The reporters surged closer. Evan held out a firm hand. I said back up. Something in his tone, something cold and unshakable, made the crowd hesitate. But before he could move us through, a voice rose above the shouting. "There she is! The woman who thinks she's untouchable." A man shoved through the reporters, red with anger, holding a printed copy of the fake email. One of my senior engineers, the one who had been most vocal about the alleged policy changes. He stopped inches from my face. "We trusted you, and you lied to every single one of us." Evan stepped fully between us before I could speak. "She didn't lie." The man barked a laugh. "Says who you? What are you, her personal guard dog?" His words snapped something inside me. I stepped forward, voice sharp. That's enough. The man ignored me, pointing his finger inches from my face. I hope the board fires you. People like you ruin companies. Evan's hand shot out, grabbing the man's wrist mid-air. Firm, controlled, unmistakably protective. You're done here, Evan said quietly. Go home. The engineer yanked his arm free, glared at both of us, and stormed off. Reporters kept shouting, but Evan guided me through them, slow but purposeful, until we reached the doors leading to the underground garage. Only when they closed behind us, sealing out the noise, did the silence return. I leaned against the cool concrete wall, letting out the breath I had been choking on. Evan stood a few feet away, hands braced on his knees, breathing hard, though he tried to hide it. I watched him for a long moment. You didn't have to protect me like that. He straightened slowly, looking at me with something raw in his eyes. I know. He took one step closer. But I wanted to. My throat tightened. You always step in, I whispered. Even when you think you shouldn't. Even when I've hurt you. His chest rose and fell once sharply. Claire. His voice trembled for the first time since I'd known him. That's not why I came tonight. Then why I whispered. The truth hovered in the space between us like something fragile, something dangerous. Evan looked down, ran a hand across the back of his neck, then finally met my eyes again. Because I wasn't angry that you were CEO. I was angry that it made me realize something I didn't want to admit. I held my breath. He swallowed. I cared. More than I should have. More than made sense. More than I let myself believe. He shook his head slightly, almost laughing at himself. And when I realized that I panicked, so I walked away. My chest tightened, aching. Pain and relief mixing like two storms meeting. I stepped closer, not touching him yet, just close enough to feel the warmth of him. I wasn't hiding from you, I said softly. I was afraid. Afraid you would walk away if you knew the truth. Afraid that being CEO would make you see me differently. Afraid you would think I lived in a world too far from yours. His eyes softened. I never cared about your title, Claire. His voice was low, trembling. I cared about the woman I met holding a coffee cup with shaking hands. I cared about the woman who apologized to everyone even when she didn't have to. I cared about the woman who looked tired every morning but still found time to smile at people who didn't deserve it. I cared about you before I knew who you were. I inhaled sharply, the truth sinking deep. Slowly, he reached out and took my hand. His thumb brushed over my knuckles, a small motion, but I felt it everywhere. I stepped closer until we were barely inches apart. Evan, I whispered, I need you to hear something too. You were enough before you knew my name. His forehead touched mine. A quiet surrender. A quiet beginning. The truth had come for us that night. And for once, it did not break us. It set us free. The morning of the Second Chance Initiative event arrived with a strange stillness, the kind that settles over a city just before something meaningful happens. I stood backstage at the convention center, palms cold despite the warmth of the bright overhead lights. Rows of white chairs filled the auditorium beyond the curtain, each one holding a donor, an executive, a leader, a reporter, or someone who had once been told they were not enough. Today, I was supposed to tell a story about second chances, about seeing people instead of resumes, about rebuilding trust in corporate culture. But all I could think about was Evan. Evan, who had walked into that chaotic board meeting and spoken for me when no one else dared. Evan, who had admitted the truth he had tried so hard to bury. Evan, who was now somewhere in the building sitting in the back because he hated attention, waiting for a speech he didn't know was partly about him. I smoothed the front of my suit, trying to steady my breath. My assistant Emily hovered nearby. Ready, Claire? She asked gently. I nodded, though ready was not the word for what I felt. The announcer's voice boomed. Please welcome CEO of Donovan Tech, Claire Winslow. Applause rose like a wave as I stepped onto the stage. The lights were blinding for a moment, but then my eyes adjusted. A sea of faces looked back at me. Some curious, some skeptical. Many hopeful. I gripped the podium lightly and began. Thank you for being here. We call this program the Second Chance Initiative, but what we are really building is something much simpler, something we've forgotten how to offer. Humanity. A few murmurs spread. I took a breath. The truth is, I didn't fully understand the power of a second chance until someone taught me without meaning to. I paused, scanning the room, and then almost instinctively, my gaze drifted toward the back. There he was, Evan, standing against the wall near the exit, arms loosely crossed, expression unreadable, but eyes fixed on me like he was willing me to speak my truth. My throat tightened. I continued. A few months ago, I had a morning that went wrong in every imaginable way. My card failed in a cafe downstairs, and before I could explain, I found myself standing there humiliated, judged, and unable to defend myself without revealing who I was. The audience hung on the words. I exhaled slowly. But someone stepped forward, someone who didn't know my name, didn't know my job, didn't know anything about me, except that I needed help in a moment where nobody else cared to look. He paid for my coffee. No questions. No pity. Just a simple act of kindness that I didn't realize would change my entire life. A soft ripple moved through the room. I glanced at Evan again. His jaw tightened. His shoulders shifted. I knew then that he understood I was speaking about him. I continued. That moment made me question everything about how we see each other, how quick we are to assign value based on a title, an income, a polished resume. But what about the people who have lived storms we never asked about? The people carrying grief or rebuilding their lives in silence, the ones who show up anyway. Something caught in my voice, but I pushed through it. We screened thousands of applicants last year, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that we rejected some of the strongest people simply because of blank spaces in their past. Blank spaces that sometimes come from losing everything and choosing to stand back up. My fingers gripped the podium harder. Evan was perfectly still. Today, with this initiative, we are rewriting that mistake. We are choosing to see people not for what they lost, but for what they still carry. Strength, resilience, integrity, compassion. I paused, then said the words that had been sitting in my chest like a heartbeat. And there is someone here today who taught me that lesson not through lectures or strategy or corporate governance, but through kindness, through steadiness, through showing up when it mattered. The room leaned in. My pulse hammered. The name formed before I could stop it. Evan Morgan. His head lifted slightly, eyes widening just enough for me to see, even from this distance. I felt my breath hitch, but I kept going. I want to acknowledge him publicly today because he is the reason I am standing on this stage. His presence changed the way I lead. His honesty changed the way I see people. His courage changed the way I see myself. A hush fell so deep I could hear the faint hum of the overhead lights. Some in the audience turned to look at him. Evan shifted like he wanted to disappear, but he didn't move. He stayed. I stepped away from the podium and onto the front of the stage, speaking without a script now. Leadership is not about knowing everything. It is about seeing people clearly, and there is someone I see clearer than I ever expected to. My eyes met his again, steady and certain. "Thank you, Evan," I said softly into the microphone. "You reminded me that kindness is leadership." The applause started slowly. A few claps, then more. Then the entire auditorium rose to their feet in a standing ovation that washed over the stage like thunder. I should have smiled. I should have basked in it, but all I could see was him. Evan standing there frozen, blinking, as if he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. When the event ended, people rushed toward me. Reporters, executives, admirers, questions flew in every direction. But I was moving before they could surround me. I pushed through the side door, scanned the hallway, and there he was. Evan stood alone near the glass windows, hands in his pockets, staring out at the city like he hadn't moved since I said his name. I walked toward him, my heels silent on the carpet. He didn't turn, not until I reached him. When he finally looked at me, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You said my name." "Yes," I breathed, on purpose. He swallowed hard. "Claire, you didn't have to do that." I stepped closer until our shoulders almost touched. "I know, but I wanted to." He looked at me then, the way he had looked at me in the garage and the elevator in the storm of reporters. Except now, the fear was gone. Only truth remained. I reached for his hand, lacing my fingers with his. He shuddered softly, as if the touch undid something in him. "You mattered long before anyone recognized you," I said. "Today the world just caught up." His forehead rested lightly against mine, and for a long, quiet moment, the world outside the glass windows disappeared. The morning everything turned to light did not begin with fireworks or confessions or the grand gestures people imagine when they talk about love. It began with a quiet knock on my apartment door. A gentle, hesitant knock, the kind someone makes when they are not sure they are welcome, but hope they might be. I opened the door to see Evan standing there, hands in his coat pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, as if the world still weighed more on him than he wanted anyone to know. His eyes lifted to mine. "Morning," he said softly. My heart stuttered. "Morning." He stepped inside slowly, like he was entering something fragile. His gaze swept the room, not with the judgment of someone evaluating a CEO's home, but with the deep attention of someone taking in the space of someone they care for. "I made coffee," I told him, nodding toward the kitchen. He smiled faintly. "I figured you might." I handed him a mug, and for a moment our fingers brushed. It was a small contact, barely a touch, but it felt like a beginning sewn into something long overdue. We sat on opposite sides of my sofa, close enough for warmth, but far enough that it still felt like a choice. For a long stretch, neither of us spoke. The city outside was waking up, traffic beginning to hum, light filtering through the blinds in long, soft stripes. Finally, Evan exhaled. "Claire, we need to talk about yesterday." My chest tightened. "I know." I watched him as he ran a hand across the back of his neck, a gesture I had learned meant he was steadying himself. "When you said my name on that stage," he began, his voice low. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to walk out of the room and hide. I nodded, understanding more than he realized. And part of me, he continued, swallowed hard and whispered, felt seen for the first time in years. He looked up then, meeting my eyes fully. "No one has said my name like that in a long time. Not since—" He stopped, breath shaking, and even without him finishing the sentence, I knew what ghost he was wrestling. I placed my mug on the table and reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away if he needed. He didn't. My hand rested on top of his warm, grounding. "Evan," I said softly, "yesterday wasn't about calling you out. It was about holding you up." His eyes closed for a moment, and I felt the wall he had kept so carefully guarded begin to settle lower ease. When he opened them again, something gentler lived there, something unburdened. "You changed the way I see myself, Claire," he said. I swallowed, emotion tightening my throat. "You changed the way I see the world." He shook his head slightly. "I didn't do anything. You did everything." My voice cracked on the last word. He squeezed my hand once, slow and intentional. Then he shifted closer, not quickly, just inch by inch, until our knees touched. I didn't pull away. I didn't want to. He spoke again, voice low. "I used to think my life ended the day I lost them, that all the light I'd ever have was behind me." My breath caught. He continued. "But then you walked into that cafe with your messy bag and your shaking hands and your card that refused to work." Even then I didn't know it, but something in me woke back up. My eyes stung. "Evan," I whispered, "your life didn't end." It paused. "And now, it's beginning again." He looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and hope so raw it nearly undid me. Then he said something so quiet I almost leaned in to hear it. "I don't want to begin without you." The world seemed to stop then, not with drama, but with recognition, with truth that had waited long enough. I moved closer until his forehead almost touched mine. "You won't," I whispered. His breath hitched, then his lips brushed mine, soft, at first reverent, like he was asking permission. I answered by leaning in, closing the gap he had been too gentle to cross. The kiss was not desperate or rushed. It was steady, like the way he walked, like the way he cared, like the way he rebuilt himself piece by piece. When we finally pulled back, he rested his forehead on mine. "I want to build something, Claire," he murmured. "Something real." I exhaled shakily. "Then stay. Stay in my life. Stay in my world. Stay where I can see you every morning." He closed his eyes, and for the first time since I'd met him, he smiled without reservation. "I'm not going anywhere." The day unfolded quietly after that. We spent the morning sitting on my balcony drinking coffee while the city glowed under a pale golden sky. Evan told me about the program he wanted to build for employees dealing with personal hardship, a support system he never had himself, a lighthouse for people who felt lost. I listened, and somewhere between his sentences, I realized something simple but life-changing. This man didn't just heal alone. He healed by helping others heal, and I loved him for it. A year later, the program Evan created became one of the most praised initiatives in the company's history. Employees who had once hidden their struggles felt safe coming forward. People who had been overlooked were now being given proper support. The culture shifted like a tide, one quiet act at a time. Evan grew into his role not with grandeur, but with intention. Everyone respected him, not for his past titles, not for his tragedy, but for his presence, for the way he looked at people as if they mattered, for the way he made sure they did. And somewhere along the way, he and I found a rhythm neither of us had expected. Evenings cooking together, walks through the city, late-night coffee on the balcony, small moments layered into a life we never saw coming. But the moment it all crystallized was one morning when I walked into the kitchen half asleep. Evan stood there in a soft gray t-shirt, hair slightly messy, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. He turned when he heard me and smiled with the kind of quiet warmth that reaches a place deeper than the heart. "Morning, Claire." The world seemed to glow. Everything simple, suddenly sacred. I stepped closer, touched his hand, let my thumb brush his. That was when a thought rose in me, steady and clear. A $5 coffee didn't change my life. A man who saw me did. Evan kissed my forehead, lingering just long enough for the world to settle around us. Light pulled through the windows, warm and gentle. And for the first time in years, everything felt exactly where it was meant to be. Sometimes it takes just one moment to reveal the kind of world we live in, and sometimes it takes one person to remind us of the world we want to build. If this story touched you even a little, if you felt your chest tighten when a small act of kindness changed 2 lives, if you recognized a piece of your own journey in Claire's fear or Evan's quiet strength, then stay with me for just a moment longer, because stories like this are not about grand gestures or dramatic rescues. They are about the ordinary moments we almost miss, the small humiliations that stay with us, the tired hearts that pretend to be braver than they feel, the people who show up quietly without expecting anything in return. And maybe that is why you are here, still listening, still feeling something moving inside you. In a world that often celebrates noise and speed and achievement, there is something sacred about the gentle souls who move slowly, who notice things, who make room for other people's pain without asking for explanations. Maybe you saw yourself in Claire, trying to hold everything together while the world watched her stumble. Maybe you saw yourself in Evan carrying grief so carefully that no one even noticed the cracks. Or maybe, like so many of us, you have lived through those moments when you wished someone would see you, not for your success, not for your mistakes, but for your quiet humanity. And maybe that is why this story matters, because the truth is, life rarely falls apart all at once. It unravels in small ways in the moments when someone misunderstands us, or when we feel invisible, or when the world demands strength we no longer have. But healing happens the same way. Not in miracles, not in perfect endings, but in the small kindnesses that arrive without warning. A cup of coffee paid for at the right time. A stranger who stands beside you when the world turns cruel. A sentence that slips out and reveals a heart that has been hurting for years. If you felt something during this story, hold on to it. Not because of the drama, not because of the twists, but because something inside you remembers what it feels like to be seen. At Soul-Stirring Stories, that is why we are here. To tell stories that make you pause for a breath. Stories that whisper the truth you may have forgotten. Stories that remind you that even if life bends you, it does not have to break you. Stories where people fall, get up, and choose to walk toward the light again. And if you felt comfort or hope or just a little less alone while listening to Claire and Evan's journey, then I want to invite you to stay. Not for me, but for yourself. Because every week there is another story waiting to find the person who needs it most. A story about kindness. A story about second chances. A story about love that grows slowly, quietly, and without permission. A story that might be the reminder you did not know you were waiting for. So if this one stayed with you, if it stirred something gentle inside you, if it made you believe again in the power of doing good even when no one is watching, then subscribe and stay with us. Let the next story meet you wherever you are tonight, and let it remind you of one simple truth. The softest people carry the strongest hearts, and the smallest moments often change us the most.